Good afternoon. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Thank you for joining us today for this Creative Green webinar. We'll be talking about sustainable production in the arts. My name is Will Price. I'm the Creative Green Tools and Certification Manager at Julie's Bicycle, and I'm joined today by my colleague Graziella, also from Julie's Bicycle, and three fantastic guest speakers who will be talking all about their work in sustainable production in their organizations. So thank you for joining us today. Just before we get started, I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping bits, just to say that the conversation today is being recorded and will be shared afterwards. At the moment, you'll all be muted and your videos will be switched off as a default in this session. Also, just to say that there are closed captions available for this session, if that's of interest. So you should see in either the top or the bottom of your screen, there's a little button which will just be a CC. So if you want to turn on the closed captions, you can just click those on and off on there. We also have a Q&A box, which should also be in that kind of taskbar on Zoom. So if you do have questions throughout, please drop a question into the Q&A box there. We will have time for questions towards the end of the session. So if something does pop into your head, do pop them in there and we'll pick them up when we reach that part of the session. If there are any technical difficulties, we have my colleague Farah on hand to respond to those. So the best place for that is if you go to the chat function, so not the Q&A box, but there's a separate chat box. And if you go on there and select the all panelists options in terms of responding to one of the team, the JB team, and you can let us know if you've got any technical difficulties and we can be on hand to try and resolve that. So please do use that. Also, please, join the conversation on your preferred social media channels. We're using the hashtag Creative Green today, and please make sure you tag at Julie's Bicycle in any of the socials that you're doing today. And finally, just to say that this is a fully booked session today, which is fantastic, and we will be live streaming the event, so we'll pop the link for the live stream into the chat. So if people want to share it with anyone else who wants to have a look today, please do share it round and keep the conversation going. So just before we get started, just to say a little bit about Creative Green. So the Creative Green program at Julie's Bicycle combines a combination of things, which includes sustainability consultancy services, online tools, certification, also a series of events and an annual awards we run. And it's really built around building capacity and understanding within the sector around sustainability. And we work all across the arts and cultural sector in many different guises. And this event is a direct kind of output of that work. So it's great to have so many people here today to talk about sustainable productions in this work. So thank you all again for joining us. And I'm just going to pass over now to my colleague Graziella, who will be introducing our speakers for today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Will. I'm Graziella Melitsko-Thornton. I lead the consultancy and training team at Julie's Bicycle. I'm delighted that you are all here with us. We've been working on sustainable production very, very actively during the pandemic, because a lot of organizations have been looking backwards on what they've been doing in terms of production and wanted to start rethinking, so what's going on when we come back. In that respect, we are constantly developing methodologies, approaches, having different conversations with all stakeholders, and that's what we want to do really towards the future, amplify this conversation. I'm gonna introduce our guest speakers today. We have Paddy Dillon. Paddy is an award-winning theatre architect. He's deputy chair of the UK's Theatre Trust and also chairs the International Theatre Engineering and Architecture Conference. In May 2020, he began the Theatre Green Book, and he's going to be talking to us about that great initiative today. We have Feimatta Conteh with us as well. Feimatta is the Environmental Sustainability Manager for the Manchester International Festival. She has worked across sustainability, technology development, digital culture, and the arts for over 15 years with a very, very wide range of organizations. So welcome, Feimatta, as well. And we have Nathan Jackson, that is the head of production at Walk the Plank. Walk the Plan is one of the UK's leading outdoor arts specialists with nearly 30 years experience working with artists and communities to create amazing work in the public realm. So the structure of today, because we want to cover lots, as usual, is we're gonna have some short presentations for our three speakers, then we're gonna have a conversation, and we're gonna leave plenty of time for questions for everybody to participate. So Paddy, the floor is yours, or the microphone.
Thanks very much, Graziella, and thanks, Will, for introducing us. So as Graziella said, my name is Paddy Dillon. I'm not a theatre maker, I'm a theatre architect, but through my roles at the Theatres Trust and in running ITAT, which is the ABTT's Theatres Conference, I'm talking to theatre makers the whole time. And it was in conversations with them before COVID struck that something really interesting came out, which was a sense of frustration about the progress that theatre is making as a sector towards sustainability. And it wasn't a lack of knowledge. Sustainability was being talked about the whole time by theatre makers and performance artists. That's the result of all of the years of lobbying and educating that Julie's Bicycle and others have put into this. It wasn't for lack of commitment. Since then, through the Theatre Green Book project, I must have spoken to 300 or more theatre makers, not one of whom has not wanted to move theatre and performance towards sustainability. It wasn't for lack of good role models. There are individuals, companies, theatres across the sector who have been working sustainably, learning how to do things sustainably, trying to make shows in a way that's kinder to the planet for a long time, often with real success. There's loads of good thinking, good ideas out there. And yet, as one theatre maker said to me, really tellingly, it feels as if we're all waiting for something to be invented. And so when COVID came along, which has been this long, tragic, debilitating closure of all of our performance venues, we just started some conversations among theatre makers of all kinds, from directors through to set builders, from costumes departments through to production managers and producers, from all parts of the sector, from the commercial sector, from the subsidised sector, to try and answer that question of how can we find what's blocking progress? How can we create the tool? How can we answer the question of how theatre as a whole can move forwards? And that was how the Theatre Green Book initiative started to take shape. And I think the two things we realized that were really telling and that really helped us bring it to the place it is now, and I'll talk about that in a minute, is firstly realizing that nobody can achieve sustainability by themselves. I had designers, production managers, technical directors, people from across that spectrum talking about their sense of frustration that however much they wanted to create a show more sustainably, they couldn't move things forward unless everybody else was involved as well. If the director wasn't interested, if the set builder was still buying plywood from unsustainable sources, there's nothing that they could do to make the show sustainable. And I think what came clear is that you had to see this as systems change. It's not just about individual passion or commitment or expertise. It's about setting up a system, taking that intricate connection of all the people who make up a production and working out not only what each one of them needs to do differently, but what everybody else needs to do differently to allow change to happen. And that was the first thing we realized. And the second was that we needed, from all of the brilliant advice and guidance and thinking that was out there, from Julie's Bicycle and from others, we needed to create one set of standards, one common set of guidance that everybody could use. Theatre's made by freelancers. It's made by teams who come together for one show and then break up again, and its members go off to another city or another town or another theatre to make another show. And unless people can be certain that everyone around them is familiar with the same guidance, has done it before, knows what to expect of each other, it's impossible to move towards sustainability. And so we were certain that we needed to create a standard, a book of guidance that everybody could share, whether you're making opera or commercial musicals or small rural touring shows, the principles are the same, and we could draw them into one set of guidance. And so that, in brief, is what we did. We were talking from the outset to Julie's Bicycle and others who've been working in this field for years. We brought in professional sustainability consultants, Bureau Happold, who are used to writing guidance for different sectors. And together with them, we brought together theatre makers of all kinds, because this had to be guidance that came from theatre makers to theatre makers. And the result of all those conversations last winter is the Theatre Green Book, the first volume, Sustainable Productions, which is out there now. You can download it off the Theatre Green Book website and start using it straight away. It's in a trialing version. We want your feedback. We want to make it better. We want your help in doing that. But the important thing is it's there to use now as you reopen. That's why we really hurry to get it ready. And we know that there are, large numbers of theatres across the UK that are already working with the Theatre Green Book standards and committing to making shows in a more sustainable way. I'll shut up there and pass on to others to talk about themselves, and really look forward to the conversation between us.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I already got a couple of questions, but we're gonna follow the script and we're gonna pass to Feimatta.
Hello, I'm Feimatta Conteh, and as Graciela kindly introduced me, I'm the Environmental Sustainability Manager at Manchester International, MIF. And I've had that role since October 2020. So actually it's really interesting, Paddy, to hear you say that the Green Book started to come together in May of that year, and it feels like what a year we're all in. And I've been full-time since January of this year. And for those who don't know, MIF is it's happening in 2 weeks' time, 18 days in the city of Manchester. And this is where I feel really thankful that my colleagues who are in charge of planning and all of it have planned for a stage 3 festival in terms of the government roadmap. So there's not any last minute readjustments and things. So yeah, as working as a sustainability manager, so I'm not part of the production team and I'm not part of any team within MIF, but that doesn't mean that I'm the only person that's responsible for sustainability. But how do we have those conversations where people understand that, the parts that they have to play and what I'm there for? So trying to work out how do we deliver sustainability if people can kind of go, well, we've got a sustainability manager, they'll do it, and actually how getting people across teams to understand where sustainability kind of intersects with their areas of work. And so as I'm not a theatre production professional, I kind of approach it as trying to have conversations with people about what they're doing and the projects that they're working on, and also respecting the knowledge that people already have. Like Paddy says, theatre and all kinds of arts and productions are made by freelancers, for people who've been sharing information and knowledge, across their works and in their different settings. So kind of what I've been trying to do is kind of open up conversations with the production managers for the different projects across MIF 21, asking people, are you already doing things around sustainability? What can I help you with? What can I go away and research for you? And sort of presenting myself as a resource around that. And actually thinking about how I got to that point. I worked before as the sustainability manager in Arcola Theatre, so quite a long time ago, and we did a lot of things sort of setting up, getting involved in sustainable theatre. And I always sort of used to prepare by having loads of information that I could give to people of this is what you can do to be more sustainable, and realising that I was, it's only sort of took me a while to realise I was handing it over to people who already had so many things to think about, who were already on kind of fixed fees for their time, and so going, here's some more stuff to read, really wasn't working. And I was getting disheartened, and I was getting well, why aren't people listening? Why, feeling kind of that. And actually Paddy, it was with the Green Book, and I was like, how am I going to get the Green Book to all the production managers in MIF? Do I email it to them, and do I then go, oh, have you read my email, and all of that? And it was our technical director was just have a conversation with them. And he's like, oh yeah, that's it, isn't it? Have a chat and say, here you go. And that kind of dialectic, I want to pass on all of this information. It's important, it's important, but you don't have time. Actually played out in another way, because we had a production manager just kept, saying to me, well, just give me an alternative to that. Give me an alternative to this material. I need an alternative PVC tape, different cable ties. And it's it's not just about switching one thing for another. It's about, as you said, Paddy, it's that like, we need to change the system, we need to change the process. But actually, the thing I've written down here is like, who's the person who pulls the lever? How do you do that? And I'm having those conversations now. And I think actually what I would like to see happen, I think we are going to make happen, is, and people might know as MIF, we're moving into a new venue soon. It's called the Factory. So it's going to be really big. It's huge. Don't ask me about how much concrete's involved in it. I'm kind of go, right, okay, this is it. From when we go into the Factory, this is how we're going to do things. And what me and my production manager colleague talked about is like, we're going to change what, you know, in theatre is called the white card or the green card meeting. We're going to allow more time before, from the first point of contract to that meeting, and see what happens. If we allow more time in the process, will we get more sustainable productions out of it? And so that's what I'm really excited about, that epiphany of like, oh, it's not about me just giving you more information. It's not about you asking for different materials. It's both of us sitting down and saying, let's see what happens when we give more time to creating work. And I remember sometime, I think, I don't know where I heard it, like, it's making work with the same budget, but just putting the budget to different things. So if you kind of think about putting more budget into time, into people, rather than into materials, what's the impact that'll happen? And I will love to come back and report to you and say that it's brilliant and we get more sustainable productions. So like I say, I've been talking to the production managers for across the projects in MIF 21, asking them about how I can support them, what we can do. And is thinking about the standards in the Green Book, and there was a little bit of me was like, it's a bit late, we've already started, we can't really match all of it. But actually what I've done is I've gone and sort of made myself a little spreadsheet and gone, oh, we're doing that. And it's like, don't wait for everything to be in place before you start doing something. Start monitoring and measuring things now, and then you go, okay, well, we did that, we didn't manage that, okay, well, we'll do it next time. And in the conversations I've been having with production managers, one of them kind of challenged me because I was a bit apologetic of like, you know, sorry, I'm taking up your time. You've only got 30 minutes. And what they said was, you know, in all of the work that they're doing this year to create shows in MIF 21, COVID is just there. It's like, there's a COVID budget allocated to shows. COVID is on the agenda for every meeting and all of that. And she said, why isn't sustainability like that? And I'm like, I haven't got an answer, because actually, we are in a creative space. We are working with people who can respond to challenges like that. So, and we've responded, you know, in various ways to the challenges created by COVID, and we're still making work. So why can't we put sustainability on the agenda like that? So I guess maybe that's a question we can discuss a bit later. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Feimatta. Really key topics. Particularly time, headspace, different allocation of budget. Yeah, but we're going to introduce Nathan now, that is going to talk about their approaches towards outdoor events.
Thank you. I suppose, yeah, I'm from Walk the Plank. I'm head of production here. I've been at Walk the Plank for 18 years or something. And we're quite a different beast, I suppose, to the Theatre Trust or to the International Festival. We are a producing company, and I'll just tell you a little bit about what we do, because it will give you a bit of context. I suppose we produce large-scale and small-scale outdoor events, working from perhaps village square to international stage. We have a trading subsidiary that does pyrotechnics and special effects. We tour our own shows that we've created. We also have fabrication and technical workshops here in Salford at our sort of creative hub, Cobden Works. And we also have a program of training and engagement, particularly, well, I suppose both internationally and also hyper-locally here in Salford. So we have school children at the moment in our space here rehearsing a play. I suppose we've been on a journey for a long time thinking about environmental stuff. I think I took responsibility for our environmental policy. I think it was in 2007. And I think then we had a tiny 1-paragraph statement about how we cared about the earth, something like that, pretty generic, pretty vague. And I ended up with a responsibility for it because it was becoming apparent that the Arts Council were going to ask us to start telling them things about what we were doing, about how much energy we were using, how much water, this kind of thing. And the reason it was given to me was because outside of my work with Walk the Plank, I sort of had a history of being an eco-activist involved in ecological direct action, low impact living, alternative technologies. I've built my own solar powered sound system and lighting rig. And I guess that those interests made it apparent that I was the obvious person to be taking this on. And I suppose at first, a lot of what I was doing was under the radar. I changed the environmental policy to a sustainability policy, and everyone just signed it off without thinking about what that meant. But to me, that was quite significant. It was about talking about more than just environmental stuff. It was talking about the social impacts of our work. It was talking about economic impacts. And I think that those are all linked together, and that was important. And we went beyond what we were asked to report on by the Arts Council, because we were a national portfolio organisation. We were required as part of our funding agreement to tell information to Julie's Bicycle, well, to the Arts Council through Julie's Bicycle. And we went beyond the minimum requirements. We started adding in extra things to report about. And we started a project with Manchester City Council, which was called Manchester Day, which was a celebration of Manchester, a civic celebration, including a large parade and various other things. And we set up a temporary workshop as part of that. And we included that as one of our premises. And including that as one of our premises meant that we needed to start measuring stuff. And so the production team, which I managed, became really enthused about this, just the thinking about it, the counting, the measuring, and the process of doing that made us start to question things, I suppose. And also we were creating an annual action plan. And in that action plan, we were setting, our approach was very much, what are the easy things we can do, the sort of no-brainers or the low-hanging fruit. And so we'd start to choose these things and say, let's do that, let's do that. And then at the end of the year, we'd create a report about all these things we've done. And I think after about 3 or 4 years, I wrote a document that was about our journey in sustainability, which we shared widely in the company at a company conference. And it sounded really great. And suddenly there was a pride in what we were already doing, and other people were starting to tell other people about what we'd done. And another initiative that we were involved with was the Manchester Arts Sustainability Team in Manchester, which is arts organisations coming together. And again, it was a bit under the radar in that it wasn't the chief execs of the organisations, it was the operational managers. It was the people responsible for building system, for the management of buildings, or responsible for production managers and so on. And we were driving each other forward, because we would meet every 6 weeks or so and have to tell each other what we'd been doing in sustainability terms. And also we were sharing knowledge. And so that was also a driver in that. But I think the thing that's been really successful, as I'm most proud of within our organisation, is that we've created a culture where sustainability is now part of the agenda. It's on the agenda of all the meetings. We're still looking for those low-hanging fruits, the easy things, but the things that seemed hard 5 years ago now seem easy or easier. And I suppose the evidence of that cultural shift, I suppose, is particularly around our fireworks operations. Now, one of the low-hanging fruit that we identified many years ago was that we use quite a lot of copper wire in the setup of a firework display, because we use electrical igniters to set off the fireworks, and often we have to extend those igniters using bell wire. And at the end of the show, that was getting all cleared up and just disappearing into waste. And so we set up a very simple incentive scheme to encourage people to collect up the copper wire. And the incentive scheme was that if they separated that waste, we would weigh it in and we would turn that into a beer account. And at the end of the year, we'd go to the pub and we'd drink the copper wire money. That was great. That worked really well. There was never a single piece of copper wire left on the ground ever again or in the waste. But what it also made was that, so people came to me a couple of years later and said, but what about all the plastic? We're separating it out now. Now what we can see is we've got cardboard, which goes in the cardboard recycling. We've got copper, which is going in the copper recycling. But what about all the plastic? And so, led by our team of freelance pyrotechnicians, we began a review process where we looked at every single process from the point that we order a container of fireworks to be delivered to us, to arriving in our stores, to being dealt with, to being prepared to go out onto a firework display site, to being rigged, to being fired, to being packed away. And we looked at every single process and went, are we using the right thing for the right job here? We're using gaffer tape to seal up boxes. Why are we doing that? We should be using paper tape. And we looked at all different things. We looked at biodegradable plastics. I mean, one of the major challenges with fireworks, I'm sorry if I'm going on a bit, is about waterproofing, because we're in Britain. So you want to keep everything dry. And the easy way to keep everything dry is to wrap it in plastic. So whether that's sellotape or whether it's plastic bags with sellotape around them. So we had a sort of very simple hierarchy of safety, sustainability, economics. It's got to be safe primarily. That's really key with what we're dealing with, the dangerous things. But then we want it to be sustainable and we want to be able to afford it. And it was brilliant. We had a year where we said, we're going to experiment. We're going to look at all the different things. We're going to say, can we use this? Can we use that? And so we looked at different ways of waterproofing things. We looked at ways we could, and we discovered that biodegradable plastic was a nonsense. That was quite an early step. We discovered that. We got all different products. We went, there's no difference. Degradable means, what we need to do is eliminate plastic. So we did that largely, to a great extent, eliminated most of the plastic or changed it for reusable forms of plastic. So I just use that as an example, I suppose, and that didn't come from a meeting. It didn't come from an action plan. It didn't come from me as a manager. It came from the team going, we're totally on board with this. We can see what we're trying to do. We understand the motivations behind this activity, the ethics of it, the social responsibility, and the collective nature of the challenge. And we want to get on board with that. And I suppose, so we're taking that forward again now. We've done that process, and we're continuing. We've got a number of subgroups now of sustainability. We have our sustainability action team that meets, but our workshop team are meeting separately to look at every single process in the workshop that we've got, where we're fabricating things, and trying to work out how we make that more sustainable. So what am I trying to say? I don't know. I'm confused.
No, it's clear, Nathan, it's fine.
Sorry.
No, it was clear. The whole idea was clear, really.
Yeah, I suppose I'm just infused, I suppose, by a 10-year process that things change, not necessarily by top-down approach, but by changing of culture within an organization. And that's key. Having an open dialogue, being open and prepared to be criticized. And I suppose that's part of it, is going, we are trying to improve and we know we're not perfect. Therefore, tell us where we're going wrong. And that's a helpful thing.
Sorry, Graciela, to
Feimatta wants to add something already. Yes,
Nathan, exactly what you said just now. I've written that into well, it's just the environmental sustainability policy for MIF. I can't remember what it is, but I've tried to align our sustainability policy with the stated values of the organization. One of the things that I've written is like, we invite people to comment and critique on, what we're doing in terms of sustainability. We can learn by having that dialogue from people. So people just like, brilliant, that's great. Like, no, tell me what I'm doing wrong so I can learn how to do it better. So yeah, sorry,
I'll say one more thing, which is that I suppose in the last 12 months, one of the initiatives we've taken is to become an entirely carbon literate organization. Mm-hmm. So every single person that works for us and every single person that's going to come to work for us in the future will go through a carbon literacy training process, which then enables them to get up to speed with where the rest of the organization is.
Yeah, I think you touch in all the key elements that we look constantly, really. Literacy, the cultural of organizations, the importance of time. I cannot stress that much really as possible, because starting late means that it's much more difficult to do research about possible alternatives. You rush it, you end up having multiple deliveries for logistics. So all the planning element is really central. And what is your view? I'm going to touch on a delicate point, because when we've been advising to a number of organizations, there is a little bit sometimes not that much flexibility on the actual design. And I found it that, sorry, there is an airplane just now passing by. Sometimes we find a little bit we are challenged in terms of, well, looking at strictly sustainability options may restrict the freedom of the artist or the freedom of the designer. I don't know, was Paddy your view on that one? I found it, yeah.
It's a really, really interesting question. And I said that when we were working on the Theatre Green Book, we were trying to talk to theatre makers of all kinds. And we spent a lot of time talking to directors, to artistic directors, to writers. And one of the points that an artistic director made to us really early on, and it really struck home with me because it seemed to me absolutely right, was he was saying, look, you can stress the importance of making theatre with less, with getting rid of materials, with getting rid of stuff. And yes, there will be directors who really respond to that well. And indeed, all creative artists are aware that parameters and constraints can be incredibly helpful. You know, as an architect, I'm used to the fact that there's a budget, that the site might be quite small, and that can be a real spur to working creatively. All of that's true, he said, but in the end, if sustainability, if the Theatre Green Book forces theatres into a kind of austerity theatre, tells theatre makers that the only shows they can make is by going back to sort of Peter Brook in the 1970s and everything's bare stage apart from two props. You know, a kind of theatre which a lot of us love, but it can't be the only kind of theatre. Then in the end, you're not going to take creative teams and creative artists with you. And that's really resonated with me, because theatre has to go on being rich and ambitious and broad. It has to go on being able to make work about all kinds of different subjects. And yet, of course, it has to be able to do it in sustainable ways. And the task I think that we have, or certainly that we had in putting together the Theatre Green Book, is simply to make clear what the parameters are of working now in the context of the climate emergency. It's changed parameters for all of us. We all have to live in different ways and travel in different ways and eat in different ways, and yes, make art in different ways as well. And all we can do, all we must do, is make those parameters clear, make clear the impact of using virgin materials, make clear the impact of multiple deliveries, make clear the standards by which theatre has to be made now if it's going to be made responsibly. And theatre is a creative art form, and creative artists will find ways to make brilliant and visually rich and beautiful shows sustainably. And I can think of lots of examples of that. There was a wonderful image that a set designer called Jess Curtis sent me the other day of a show she'd made for Storyhouse in Chester, which was just visually incredibly beautiful, but it was all made out of sustainable, reused, recycled products. And I think the ways in which theatre will learn not to be narrow, not to be drab or dour or shabby, is something that we can absolutely rely on artists to do. All we have to do is point out the constraints, the parameters, call them what you will. And I'm quite sure that theatre, which has reinvented itself so many times over the years and decades, will reinvent itself with something that we haven't yet seen yet. And that's one of the most exciting things of all.
Yeah, that's
going to add into that, Graciela, thinking about that, you're thinking about the set designer, and I guess that was kind of thinking about the materials that were coming in. And I think it's really important to think about what happens to those materials after the show is finished. Like, what value do they still retain? Where can they fit into a circular economy model? So it's not kind of like, oh God, we can't buy things and do stuff. It's like, okay, well, we'll buy these things, we'll use them for a while, and then we'll pass them on to somebody else who'll have a different use for them. And that's really important thing, to not think that everything is a linear process. Like, we're just starting, well, probably a little bit too late, but, you know, might as well start now, thinking about reuse of items that are going to be coming out of shows in MR21. And it's not necessarily within the arts that they will be reused, but we're thinking, okay, there's some sofas, who within our communities and our networks might have use of those. And it's that sort of, yeah, seeing the arts as connected with within the ecosystems of, you know, the localities, the community groups and all of that. And yeah, building those connections, I think, is really important as well.
And I think part of that also is that right now is probably the hardest sustainability is ever going to be. You know, at the moment, yeah, reuse and recycling is quite difficult. It's quite hard to find salvage materials and so on. But those markets and that infrastructure is going to develop. I know that Feimatta and her colleagues in the Manchester area are already talking and thinking about shared storage and so on. There's another scheme like that in South Wales. Reset Scenery in Glasgow is working on that. There's a scheme for the GLA that we've been looking at. It's going to get easier. We've been talking about initiatives so that theatres and performance buildings and companies can network their assets to make sharing easier. We've been talking about ways of making sets so that it's easier to salvage materials. So yes, it is hard now sometimes to find materials that you can really trust. But it's going to get easier. I'm sure it's going to get easier as time goes by.
Yes, so no, that's we had a few webinars around innovative materials. I'm very optimistic on that scene as well. There is a lot of experimentation. I think it's about building bridges as well between the construction industry probably and the art sector, where in the construction industry going enough economy of scale to start looking at really quite a lot of transformation in the waste from cement to steel to timber. We're already seeing some interesting innovation in timber as well. Timber, I refer to timber because it's quite important, because the demand of timber is predicted to triplicate in the next few years, which is a bit critical. And so it's an area where, more innovation is needed. We're going to have to give space for questions in a little bit, but I think it's really important the spaces to come all together in terms of infrastructure is quite an important conversation really coming when we come out a little bit from all the lockdown or semi-lockdown that we are now, on what venues and activities fully reopen. No? But Feimatta, I can see you want to say something. Oh, no, okay.
No, for probably the first time in a little while, I didn't have anything that I wanted to share just now, but yeah.
I don't know, okay, I thought. Yeah, so in terms of, I think in terms of timing, I think we should go to the questions now. I can see there is a few questions there. The first one is from Maditi. It says, Feimatta, did you undertake any specific training in sustainability to work in the field, or was this built up through your work experience?
I'd say probably it's built up through my work experience. I wouldn't say I was on the same kind of level as Nathan at all, but definitely it's something that was an interest of mine before I started working in the subject. So outside of work, I do a lot of volunteering for an educational charity which takes children camping, and you live without any kind of the standard equipment or things that you would have at home, and you just live as a community, creating whatever you can create with whatever's around you. And I think actually that's informed a lot of my philosophies and approaches to things. But in terms of like specific sustainability training, no, I haven't. I think actually I just saw a question pop up about carbon literacy training, and Nathan, you mentioned about doing that and walk the plank, and that's something that we want to do at Manchester International Festival. And I think it's something that I think is really important. It means that everybody can be speaking within the same language and have the same frames of reference to what you're talking about. And as you say, it can really empower people to sort of, understand not only what their carbon footprint is and what they can do about it. Yeah, so there's various bits of on-the-job training that I've had, but it's definitely not something that I've studied outside of my work.
Okay, good. There is a question for Nathan as well. In terms of your carbon literacy program, did you do that in-house, or how did you go about setting that up?
We've been very lucky in Manchester that the carbon literacy project is based in Manchester, and a wonderful team at Home. Home is a multi-arts venue in Manchester, and two of the team there are trained carbon literacy trainers, qualified carbon literacy trainers, and they have been running training around carbon literacy in Manchester for some time, and have been developing an arts-based version of that training with the Manchester Arts Sustainability Team and Manchester City Council. So our training was led by them. So that's where we've been doing it.
That's good. And I got a question from me related to that. And you also been involved in an innovation lab.
I beg your pardon?
An innovation lab?
So we were also with the Without Walls network, which is like a network of outdoor arts festivals and touring companies. We ran a green production lab, which was for production managers working in the outdoor arts to come together for a number of sessions to discuss various things around circular economy, around power, around things. And the idea behind that was that production managers are great catalysts. They're great agents of change. They move from project to project. And if we could get a cohort of production managers sort of singing from the same hymn sheet, having the same sort of idea, I suppose it's a bit like the Green Book, the idea of standards, the idea of, and also about changing expectations about this is the way we do things. I suppose my idea is that we should be thinking about sustainability like health and safety. Health and safety are both good things. Sustainability sits right alongside that. You know, without all those three things, what is the point in anything? So we want to be healthy, we want to be safe, and we want to be sustainable. And I suppose getting production managers all aligned in how we do things would be a great thing. So it was an opportunity for people to share and discuss. And we'll be following that up. I'm sure we'll be doing more. We were massively oversubscribed. We didn't want to have too many people in the sessions because we wanted it to be possible that people could share. It was a safe space, if you like, where you could talk about successes and failures, because we need to learn from our failures. And if we're afraid to talk about those, then we're not going to progress very efficiently.
Yeah.
I'll just come in and I think that's, Nathan is so right. The parallel between health and safety and sustainability and how we make both of them absolutely embedded in everybody's practice to the extent that they don't need to think about it anymore. And that's very much why, when I was talking earlier about with the Green Book, that one of the first things we realized was you just had to have standards that everybody knew so that they just absorbed them. And that's actually why we called it the Theatre Green Book, because it's like the Yellow Book of Technical Standards for Places of Entertainment, the Health and Safety Bible, and everybody uses the same Bible. It's not like, you know, Home has one health and safety book and the National Theatre has another and whatever. That would be a nightmare. You'd have accidents the whole time. And sustainability, I think you're so right. It's got to be the same. It's got to be something that's just second nature. Nobody stops to think about it. Nobody questions it. That's exactly where we need to get to. And I think also that point about honesty, which Feimatta was talking about as well earlier, is completely right. We mustn't get into a sort of either a blame culture or a boasting culture around sustainability. You know, it's a big learning curve for all of us. It's going to change performance, and it's something that all theatre makers, performance makers need to learn. And the more people can be completely honest. I had an email the other day from someone who'd been you know, they've been working on a show to Green Book standards, and there are things that they found really, really difficult, and they were being honest about it. That's great, because that's how we all learn, and that's how people stop hiding stuff. It's about how people stop blaming each other. It's about how we can all go on this journey together in learning how to solve some of these challenges.
Interesting. Feimatta, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that thing about honesty and responsibility. And Nathan, you mentioned before as well about accountability and that being really important. And sorry, just thinking a conversation I was having earlier with somebody who works in the events industry. So it is kind of adjacent to our world. And they were saying how difficult it is to sort of embed sustainability because everybody thinks it's somebody else's problem, it's somebody else's issue to solve. So you have a venue, you know, that's hired by an event organizer who then brings in somebody to deliver it. And it's like, so everybody's got a little bit in the pie. So actually it's like, rather than trying to work out who's responsible for it, just think about what you can do in your bit. Do you know what I mean? It's like, rather than looking for, and I guess kind of as me as the sustainability manager here, it's like empowering people to do what they can do in their areas rather than like expecting that I'm going to be the one who's taking all responsibility for it. But that's like sharing the knowledge, sharing the information, having the conversations is where I'm coming from. Sorry, just having a little thought to myself, really.
No, that's great. Yeah, I continue with the questions. We got a question about, I'm going to read it. So from Javier, one thing is reducing emissions, but you cannot avoid them at all. What is the best way of offsetting the unavoidable emissions, e.g. planting trees? Should that go on the production's budget? Do you recommend it at all?
Shall I jump into this? And I'm going to jump in from a point of complete ignorance. I don't know, and anyone at Julie's Bicycle will give you better advice on this than I can about whether offsetting is a good thing or a bad thing, about the best way to offset if you want to offset. I suppose my perspective is a slightly different one, which is that you only need to get into this offsetting talk if you become perhaps too mesmerized by the idea of zero carbon. Let's get 90% of the way first, then let's talk about offsetting. It's like, let's not worry about, you know, how are we going to take those last little steps. Let's take all of those steps that come first. And to me, that's where all the energy needs to go. Maybe there are buildings, there are companies, there are shows which can't become completely zero carbon without some offsetting. And then I'll hand over to Graziella and say, you tell us how to do it, if you think it is a good idea or not. But for me, all of the energy is just, let's get to 90%. I'd almost rather more people made declarations about when they're going to get 90% of the way to zero, rather than declarations about getting to zero when they don't know how to. It's all about, let's make this practical. We've got so little time yet, and we just need to start taking all the steps we can, identifying the next step and taking that, identifying the further step and taking that, and moving as fast as we can. And then let's worry about offsetting after that.
Yeah, I think, Paddy, you said that very well, really. So this can be the whole topic of a conversation. So I'm really going to summarize. Yeah, we really need to reduce emissions to a maximum. Offsetting is really the last resort. And in terms of what projects to offset, there is an international carbon standard. It's called the gold standard. The idea is to look at projects that have longevity, you make sure that if you're going to be planting trees, they're going to be taken care of in the right trees in the right ecosystem for enough time, really, at least 6 years probably, depending what you are doing, or restoring ecosystems. But what we normally say about offsetting is also look for something that is really relevant for you and for your organization. Something that you go a strong resonance with that project, so you can actually put efforts towards medium and long term as well. And many organizations look at insetting. So after looking at how to mitigate, and if there is not enough resource, you could invest that money internally in the organization to actually allocate more resource in terms of, call it energy efficiency, or looking for other different solutions. But Feimatta, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, Paddy, when you said that about getting to zero, I was like, oh, I feel seen, because one of the things that we've got in the environmental policy and action plan is about a commitment to net zero, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to work that one out. I will, don't worry. But also, I just shared a link in the chat to a really good webinar that Julie's Bicycle did about carbon offsetting. So, Graziella, I just wanted to flag that.
Thank you for reminding that. And we also got a guide that has been published, so it's available on the website. So please have a look. Nathan, did you want to add anything?
I mean, it's something we've been absolutely wrestling with, the idea. So we're not thinking about it as offsetting. We've been thinking about climate investment and going, we accept that. I suppose one of the drivers around all the positive sides around offsetting is that you can only get into offsetting if you actually know what your impact is. So the only way you can do that is by actually doing the calculations. And doing the calculations is a really good process, because that enables you to see where you can, before you get into the world of offsetting, which is, I agree, the last resort, you can be looking at where can we change things as we go along. I suppose we've been thinking more about sort of climate investment and how we can choose to incorporate that as part of our budgeting, acknowledging that offsetting is proposed by some industries, and that probably isn't appropriate for what we're doing. So, we've invested in solar panels on the roof of our workshop. We're very lucky, because we're a workshop, we're using a lot of power during the day when the sun is shining, and we can get that straight in there. Unlike the typical domestic users, we don't need the big battery banks and so on. So I suppose, and also we've been thinking about what can we do locally? How can we improve the carbon footprint more broadly in our local area by using some of our resource to invest in that? So we're less interested in planting trees in the Amazon and more going, can we help to finance initiatives in our local area that will help reduce the carbon footprint here? But as I say, it's something very fresh that we're wrestling with, but it's sort of our ambition. We've been visioning for the next 10 years, where would we like to be? And I suppose it's partly driven that Manchester has a carbon net zero target for 2030 or something ridiculously soon like that. And we've looked at the graphs and gone, it's impossible. It's impossible. We can't get to that without some level of offsetting. That's an unachievable target. Therefore, if we're going to accept that there's going to be some level of that kind of activity, what is the best way we can do that? And that's where we came in with this idea of climate investment. But we're still working out. I've not got the answers. I don't know what we should do.
Yeah, we got more questions coming. So there's a question about touring. How do you balance touring with its energy used for transport and carbon neutrality. Big touring companies use their own lighting and sets. How do we balance that?
I can start talking about this. I don't have an answer, but it's something that I'm really interested to engage with. Obviously, we're the Manchester International Festival, all those words are important in there. And, considering that there's lots of co-commissions and productions that aren't touring here this year, thinking about how are we bringing that back? What does that look like? And so it's not, these are all the answers to do that, but it's like Nathan's saying, like, measure it first, see how big your impact is, and then work out how you want to change it. So doing things like, is it possible to send things by sea freight rather than air freight? Yes, you'd have to change thinking about your production timelines and things, because if the Suez Canal isn't blocked up, there's a certain amount of time that sea freight takes over air freight. Are there elements of set that can be recreated in different locations rather than being transported? Are there elements of technical crew who can be recruited and trained locally rather than one of my colleagues in our international team was telling me about flying a specialist team over to Brazil to basically set up an exhibition or something. And it's like, well, could we train some people in Brazil to do that rather than flying the same specialist team to all of these different locations around the world? And I was talking with colleagues who work in the visual arts world, and they've been installing in exhibitions over this last sort of year and a half over Zoom on phones, whereas 18 months ago, it'd be like, no, we have to fly somebody there because somebody has to be there to see it. And it's like, actually, that's not happening. And actually, one of the things that's happening in the festival this year, we would normally have a weekend where we would invite international presenters and co-commissioners and other arts organisations to come to Manchester to view the work and be part of the festival. And obviously that can't happen this year. So what we're doing is a 24-hour live transmission and around the world talking to different people. And one of the things I want to do in that, and thankfully the team are allowing me to do that, is with my colleague who looks after access in MIF, is have a conversation with people internationally and say, what's changed about your working practices during COVID? What practices do we want to continue with? And what's actually, been useful about this time when we haven't been able to do things as we have done before? I don't want to say normal anymore. People keep saying we're going back to normal. It's like, no, normal never was. There was a way of doing things, and then we've had a big pause. Something else is going to happen. How do we make that something else as sustainable as possible? And I think this is a really interesting point. So yes, don't have any answers how we're going to, I have some ideas how we're going to do it. We'll try them out, we'll measure it, and we'll report on it and let you know.
I think touring is a really, really hard one. I think, throughout the Theatre Green Book, we've managed to get, expertise and knowledge from theatre makers of different sorts who have been able to share through us their knowledge of how to do things in a more sustainable way. I don't think the advice we've got about touring is brilliant. And if anybody is on this call who can help us strengthen it, please get in touch. This is absolutely a sort of collective theatre makers endeavour. I suppose my sort of, having thought about it a lot for exactly that reason, I think it's important to bear in mind that there are good things about touring. The same show is being shared with more people. That's good. I think it's important to remember that over time, like many other things, touring is going to get easier. I was talking to a theatre 2 days ago who are about to do a tour and have found a haulage company who have electric vehicles that they can work with. It's small scale. But yes, it's not always going to be what a big opera company admitted to me was 28 large lorries heading out on tour each time they put a show on the road. But beyond that, I think it goes back to something, really fundamental, which is thinking differently from the outset and more time in the conception. Graciela, you've been stressing time, and that's so, so important all the way through. And it's something that I think all three of us have been talking about, is that it's not something that you can bolt on afterwards, sustainability. It has to be right there in the fundamental conceptual thinking of the show. And if you know that you're conceiving a show to go out on the road, then of course it's got to be there. Part of the parameter, part of the reality of that show is, how's it going to do that? How many lorries is it going to take? You know, is there a way of doing it by train? A lot of people have told me that's really, really hard with the way that freight works in the UK. So if you've got to be in a lorry, what can you do to make sure that actually are there costumes you can pick up at each town you're going to? Or indeed, when you're the designer working on the costumes, perhaps even when you're the AD or the producer thinking about the show, this is how far back it needs to go. Are there shows that could be made from things you can find in any town, and therefore you don't have a big freight carbon bill between towns? Or do you have to make everything in one place? You know, and then, you know, the same sort of thinking is in the technical rig. Can you make sure you're using stuff? And this is a constraint, yes, but maybe it can be a creative one where every town of any size you're going to be able to hire locally rather than taking the kit with you. You're going to have to work differently, but is that worth exploring? So I think the slightly sort of soggy point that I'm making is that it's all about going back to the really early thinking and being aware of what the show needs to do and trying to make it to the parameters that we all know are there for what we're about.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's a great answer. And we are testing those ideas. We are working with a touring orchestra, for instance. And we are testing, how can things be planned completely different, the role of local artists, local musicians, different ways of transport. So there's really, I'm being told that we need to wrap up. So I don't know if we got time. There is a last question, which is about the ideas about engaging audiences in conversations about climate justice and sustainable practice, and connecting and inspire them to take climate action.
If it's the last question, can I give a really, really quick answer, which is yes, do.
Yes.
All that and more. Yeah, it's environmentalism without climate justice. What do they see? Sorry, hopefully it'll come across as a joke. It's like if your environmentalism doesn't include climate justice, it's just vegan white supremacy. Yeah, and Nathan, it's what you were talking about right at the beginning. It's not just environmental, it's economic and it's social, and it's about connecting all of those things and understanding that we as a world, as a people, are connected in all ways, whether we like it or not.
It's also about recognizing the power of the arts and the fact that why we are doing this is because we are engaging with people, with communities, to talk about things, to challenge ideas, and that the content of what we're doing can also reflect that. It is important that it does so. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And we're developing a show at the moment that's about to go live called the Climate Change Mythbuster, which is a touring street performance that has two actors that engage with the members of the public to talk about myths, to challenge myths that there might be about climate change and the climate emergency.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, so wrapping up, so I feel that we touch very quickly, but we touch in a lot of key elements, really: planning, time, participation, budget, systemic relationships, decision-making, literacy, training, really central. So I hope we continue all these conversations. And as I said, we really want to enable also new activities that allow us to mainstream sustainable production and to drive innovation. So I hope we can all continue the conversation. We are using, Paddy, you will be pleased that we are using the Green Guide in our training, and we are testing a lot of different things as well. So I would encourage everybody to have a look really and make it a very practical tool. And we are developing different tools as we go along as well. So really keep in touch. Thank you very much for everybody attending. Big thank you for you, really, speakers. A fantastic panel. I'm really very happy with all this conversation. Will, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, sure. Just again, just to say thanks, especially to the three speakers for joining us. It's brilliant to have the conversation, and thanks everyone for joining and asking, chipping in with questions and everything. I've also noted down, yeah, a couple of guess key words or bits of the conversation. So I've got that kind of idea of creating a culture around sustainability within within an organization, that collective responsibility, collective ownership of what people are doing, honesty being a big one, the willingness of people to challenge each other and kind of have those difficult conversations, the kind of holistic nature of things. So it's not just about substituting materials for other materials, it's a kind of bigger conversation really. And time being a crucial thing, and also engagement, obviously, with the people that you're working with audiences as well. But no, there's some really interesting things. So thank you everyone for for kind of contributing. I mean, just to say, kind of wrapping up really for this event, I just want to say a quick thank you to our Creative Green event sponsors. So that's Good Energy and Seacourt, who provide sustainable procurement options within the sector. We did actually provide some details about their work in the sector in the kind of sign-up forms for this event, but do get in touch if anyone wants to find out more about the work they do. So Good Energy obviously working within the renewable energy sector, and Seacourt looking at sustainable printing options. So thank you both to our sponsors. And just in terms of next steps, really, I guess to keep the conversation going, if anyone wants to keep this chat going on social media, continue to use the hashtag Creative Green hashtag. Also encourage people to sign up to our bulletin to stay in touch with kind of other events, other resources, other conversations that JB's involved in, to stay in touch with what we're doing. We actually have a session next week as part of our Creative Climate Chat series, and in that session we'll be exploring the role of museums to uncover and contextualize local and global environmental histories. So do look out for that next week. There's, like I said, there's details for that on our website. And also just to say, there'll be a short link to a survey actually when people leave the session today, just to give us a bit of feedback on these events and how they're run and everything. So if you can take some time just to drop a bit of feedback when you leave, that would be brilliant. But just to say thank you very much again for everyone for attending and for our brilliant speakers. And I hope it's been an interesting conversation for everyone.